Howdy folks, my name is Bucket Fridge. I hope you're all doing very well today. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel. In today's video, we're going to go over the new warrior updates for the beta that just came out, which is pretty exciting, and we got into the beta, so stay tuned for more beta related content when it comes to the tanks. But after a little bit of housekeeping, we'll jump right into the patch notes and the talent trees, so don't go anywhere. Alrighty, just two pieces of housekeeping, and then we'll hop into the talent trees. First piece of housekeeping is I just wanted to say, if you are interested in all things tanking, this is the channel for you. I will be updating all the different patch notes and changes that go along with all the different tanks, so make sure to stay tuned for those videos and subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss them. But the second piece of housekeeping is that this is just my personal opinion on the matter. There are many really great content creators, and I always suggest that all my viewers go and find as many content creators as you can and make the decisions that are best for you after gathering all the information, because nobody ever has the same needs, wants, and desires as another person playing World of Warcraft. So make sure to get as much research as you can and then make the decision that is best for you. But at the end of the day, this is just my personal opinion on the matter. Warriors are a little bit unique because they're the class that I've played probably the most of and feel very comfortable talking about all three specs. So this is the only real DPS that we'll cover on this channel. For the most part, it will be primarily tanks. But with warriors, I have played warriors for a significant amount of time and have played all three specs at a mythic rating level. So I feel like I have a little bit of expertise when it comes to these things. But again, this is just my personal opinion. So now that the housekeeping's over, we're going to hop right into the talent trees. We're going to do arms, fury, and then prot in that order. So let's hop into it. Alrighty, let's hop into the notes and we'll go over the notes and see what they have in store for us. So we'll go over the class tree first and see what they're doing with the class tree, and then we will go down each one of the specific specs. So what we'll do is, after we read the patch notes for both the general tree and arms, we will go down the general tree of arms and then the spec tree for fury and then prot, etc. So let's hop into the notes. Remove the lockout period for concussive blows. That's pretty cool. So concussive blows is the interrupt one. Still, I don't know if this is always going to be taken. It's still definitely a situational talent to take, but removing the cooldown is never a bad thing, or the lockout period, I should say. Fix various tormented memories from proccing themselves for extra durations. That makes sense. That's a bug. Weapon specializations nodes now only appear to their relevant specializations, which is really, really nice. And what that means is this guy down here, right in the middle, as you'll remember, it used to be connected to this one or this one over here, or it was Spear of Bastion actually, which got moved over here, and this was in the middle. But what it did, instead of having to spec into this to just take that 1 point or 2 point node that it used to be, now you just get a spec into this and then it'll change with the different specs. So for example, with arms, it's the two-handed weapon specialization, and then for fury, it'll be the increase your damage while dual wielding, and then for protection, it'll be the one-handed weapon specialization. So pretty cool little change. Really nice just having to put 1 point into this as opposed to having to put multiple points and or spec into these other rows if you didn't intend to already. So that's pretty nice. New protection talent variant. Crushing Force. Shield Slam deals an additional 5% damage, and now it has a 5% increased critical strike chance per rank. That is very, very nice. So in the prot tree, let's look at what we got. So the Crushing Force is this one right here. So more shield slam damage and more chance to crit with your shield slam is very, very awesome. Nice little buff there. So the new talent that they got is Barbaric Training. And so Barbaric Training is actually over here, as you'll see, as a choice node. For prot, Revenge deals more damage. For fury, it is Slam and Whirlwind deal more damage. And for arms, it is Slam and Whirlwind. And they're a little different for fury. Fury is critical strike damage is also increased by 10%, and Simon Whirlwind now deal 40% more damage but cost 5 more rage, so a smidge different. Rumbling Earth now also increases the range of Shockwave by 6 yards. That's really, really cool. You'll be able to hit quite a ways. I think with the extra range on it to begin with, it is a 10 yard, so 16 yard range. That's pretty huge. That is quite a bit, probably at least enough to be able to catch the ranged mobs that you're pulling if you are using that at M+, for example. New talent, Sonic Boom. Shockwave deals 350% damage and will always deal critical strike damage. This, I actually really love Sonic Boom, and we'll get into why more specifically when we get into the prot tree. I know a lot of people are kind of poo-pooing that they're trying to make Shockwave better. Granted, Shockwave is a very, very good stun, and if it was any higher up the tree, it would just be taken almost permanently in almost all situations for DPS, especially in any kind of M+. So there's a reason they keep it down here, and they're trying to make it more competitive with the other choice nodes down here, or the other capstones as well. So we'll go over this more specifically in prot, and I'll kind of give you an example of why I actually really love this talent. I think it's catching a lot more flack than it deserves. I think it's is actually pretty strong. New arms talent variant, Honed Reflexes. This is cooldown of Overpower reduced and the cooldown of Pummel reduced. And then for Fury, it is Raging Blow reduced and Pummel reduced the same way. The Honed Reflexes for Prot, the cooldown of Shield Slam and Pummel is reduced by 1 second. More cooldown on Shield Slam, very, very good. Big cooldown reduction, or not big cooldown reduction, but decent cooldown reduction on your 2 main abilities for both those specs. Very nice. For Arms of Protection specializations, Massacre and Sudden Death have switched places between the class tree and the spec trees and increased the execute threshold up to 35 again. So if you didn't know from last week, they actually, or the last update for Warrior, they actually reduced Massacre to 25%, which made it kind of a dead talent. It is not worth a point when you have a lot of other strong things in the tree. When you only got 5% extra execute range, wasn't very good. And they nerfed Sudden Death quite a bit last patch, but they're actually also reverted that, as you'll see right below this. Sudden Death procs per minute is now 1.7, was 1.5. This really doesn't change that much, going from 1.7 to 1.5. It might matter in a very long fight, but usually in a very long fight too, the execute window is going to be pretty big. So this changing, it really isn't too much, even if it's a slight nerf. Now, Sudden Death should refund Rage again, which is very, very nice. They took away the Rage refund that you would get if from the execute not killing the target. Now it refunds Rage properly. The thing that they did, I think that they kept though, is that they changed it back, which is wonderful to see. The execute now costs no Rage again. Thank goodness. And you get the cooldown as if you had spent 40 Rage on the execute, which is very, very nice. They had nerfed it and Sudden Death was then very, very bad in my personal opinion, and so they reverted those things and now it is back to more of a baseline, which is very, very nice. Quick Thinking now increases auto attack speed by 2.5 per rank. Quick Thinking is this talent down here, so it gives you increased attack speed for your auto attacks, which could be very useful for Prot and or Fury. I mean, for all the specs, but not necessarily a mandatory thing to take. Cruel Strike now grants critical strike damage per rank of Overpower, Raging Blow, and Revenge, respectively, which is very, very nice. Cruel Strikes is this bad boy right here down at the bottom. And then we got Thunderous Roar damage no longer is hidden, undocumented crit damage bonus, and Thunderous Roar now ticks every 2 seconds, was 3 seconds, so that's definitely a buff, which actually makes quite a difference down 1 second when this ticks over 8 seconds. So you're actually getting another tick essentially in that 8-second duration. All right, so that's actually a buff because you would technically only get 3. When it was 3 seconds, you'd only get 2 in that window because it's 3 then 6, and so it wouldn't take a third time, making it to 9. So you actually get 4 procs with the 2 seconds, which is quite big. And the duration was increased to 9 seconds, so you still only get 4 procs, about 4.5 procs technically. And it got buffed in the attack power as well, so that could be pretty good, and has been redesigned to be called Thunderous Words. Now increases the duration of Dragon Roar's bleed by 4 seconds and increases the damage of your bleed effects by 20%. This could actually really, really make the bleed build for arms pretty good, actually, because it increases the duration. So now you got 12 seconds, so now this can proc 6 times, which is really, really nice, and it increases the bleed damage by 20% of the other things as well. So this actually is pretty interesting because, and we'll go over why this is interesting, it works with Prot, Fury, and arms very, very well. So now we're getting into the arms developer notes. Generally happy where the arms is at moving forward. Changes are likely to be small and tuning based, fix various bugs and triggers, should work correctly. We've added some extra notes, so try to allow Bladestorm to feel more useful in various situations. The left side of the tree had too many 2-point nodes, so we reduced this to allow for more choices, which is awesome. That's very, very nice to see. They're taking away some 2-point nodes, just making them 1-point nodes, so we have more abilities that we can spend in the tree as opposed to having to spec into 2-pointers, which just kind of soaks up a lot of your points. All right, let's go over the arms notes. So it says new talent, Gathering Storm. While bladestorming every 1 second, you gain 5% move speed and 5% strength, stacking up to 6 times, so up to 30% strength and 30% move speed, which is really nice. This was actually a PvP talent for those of you who are PvPers out there. So they made this into just a regular talent. It was really, really good in PvP, so I imagine that Bladestorm this might actually be quite strong with Bladestorm. New talent, Dance of Death. If your Bladestorm kills an enemy, your next Bladestorm lasts 3 seconds longer, which is pretty cool. It's your next Bladestorm. So while this is really good, it would be kind of difficult to play around. You'd have to make sure that you save Bladestorm, say, for the end of a AoE pack, and then you could kill some and then extend the duration of your next Bladestorm by quite a bit. A longer Bladestorm is more damage on AoE packs. Unhinged now triggers correctly outside of Shadowlands, which is good. Unhinged, Gathering Storm, and Merciless Bone Grinder now trigger correctly from various whirlwind sources. That's always good to hear. Impale is now 1 point. That's awesome. awesome and grants 10% increased critical strike damage. Very, very good. Critical thinking now grants 2.5 execute critical damage per rank instead of cleave and whirlwind. Critical thinking is again this guy right here. So with arms, it's going to make our execute do more damage, which is very nice. Juggernaut now lasts 12 seconds. It was 8 seconds. A 4-second buff is pretty huge when it was only 8 seconds. That's essentially a 50% buff. That's pretty huge, which is very nice to see. Fatality should now always hit the target unless immune or due to specific encounter mechanics. That's very nice. Fatality is, I believe, the bottom part of the arms tree, this bad boy down here. So it will always hit, which is very, very nice. Blood shards now increased to 20%, was 10%. That is astronomically so much better. This going down to 10% meant that out of every 10 ticks of your bleeds that you only got the extra rage one time, which is rough. That is rough. But going up to 20%, that is 100% increase, which is a huge, huge difference. So this is a huge buff, 100% buff, and actually makes Blood Surge worth taking again, in my opinion. Bloodletting now causes your bleeds effects to last 6 seconds longer. I think it's supposed to say longer here. It says 6 seconds long. I think they meant to put longer, because if there was only 6 seconds, I mean, that might be that it makes it so the bleeds expire faster so you can put them up faster. But I don't know if that's what they mean by the 6 seconds long. I don't know if it's supposed to be 6 seconds longer or if it's specifically supposed to reduce the cooldown. That way you can get more bleeds more often. I'm not sure. If anybody has any clarification, let me know down in the comments below. Remove the weapon requirements from sharpened blades and concussive blows. Thank goodness for that. If you'll know, this was the talent at the very bottom here, and it used to actually be that you had to have a mace or polearm or a two-handed axe or two-handed sword. So much nicer to make sure that that is not actually a thing that we have to worry about. That was actually a concern of a lot of warrior players. Concussive blow now correctly affects the damage dealt by Warbreaker, which is very good. Concussive blows now correctly increase the damage of Colossal Smash as well. So those are all really, really good changes. Why don't we go down the arms tree now that we've gone over the patch notes? Alrighty, let's go down the warrior tree for arms now that we went through the patch notes. Alrighty, at least for arms. All right, I still think you take defensive stance. It's just a very good defensive ability for arms, as you are a little squishier than a Fury, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just definitely a very nice defensive to have. Obviously, we want to take our Rallying Cry. Spell Reflection is very, very good. We want to take our Thunderclap for our Blood and Thunder, especially because I think the bleed build is actually pretty competitive now for Warrior. And I think we definitely want to get down into War Machine. Auto attack granting 10% more rage, and we have increased auto attack speed. More rage regeneration is always good. And let's take Heroic Leap for some extra movement. And then we will take, let's say, Inspiring Presence into Honed Reflexes. Get some Crushing Force is always really good. We want to get our Frothing Berserker. We want to get our Arm to the Teeth. We want to get our Blood and Thunder. And we definitely want to get the Increased Rage, the Seismic Reverberations, and the Sudden Death with some double time. And then getting down into the bottom of the tree, why don't we take some Reinforced Plates, some Avatar, and some Memories of either the Tormented Blade Master and or Warlord. So I think if you're going to try the bleed build here, you're actually probably going to go with Thunderous Roar, which is pretty cool. But Bladestorm seems to be getting a few different buffs as well, so it'll really depend. But I think both Bleed and Bladestorm builds will be pretty darn good. So for now, why don't we actually try to build the new bleed build, because we actually got quite a bit of bleeds buffs this patch this time around, which is really nice. So we'll grab the Quick Thinking, we'll take Thunderous Roar, and then we'll take Thunderous Words, making our bleed effects do 20% more damage, which is very nice, leaving us 3 points to play around with. We definitely want to take our 2-handed weapon specialization, and now we got a little bit of choice. So what we could do, I think this is worth taking 1 point in, because with the 1 point you get the 10% stamina increase. The 2% avoidance is not necessarily negligible, but it's definitely not necessarily something that's super necessary all the time. So with the 10% increased stamina, that acts essentially as another form of defense for arms. The more health that we have, the better. And then we have a few different options that are more of utility. You could take the extra crit strike chance by 1.5% and the critical strike damage of Overpower, which is decent, but it's not a huge amount. But I think what you probably want to use this last point for is some kind of defensive ability as arms, as we always are a little weak on the defensive side for arms. So, or you could take Barbaric Training, which makes your Slam and Whirlwind do more damage, but I don't necessarily think that that's always going to be worth it. Maybe in AoE situations, that's a little bit more applicable. But for the last point, you could take Bitter Immunity, which is very, very, very good as another defensive, or you could take Impending Victory, or you could take Pain and Gain. I think that either Impending Victory or Bitter Immunity will probably net you the most defensiveness, if that makes sense, just because you're able to either restore 20% of your HP and remove all those effects, very similar to the File from Kyrian or a Dwarf racial. Very, very good. Obviously, Impending Victory is Impending Victory, healing you for a substantial amount. So I think either is very applicable, and so it really just would depend. So why don't we do something like Bitter Immunity for now, and we can wait to see whatever this is going to be, and maybe we'll spec into that with our last point instead of something else. But for the most part, this is how I would spec the arms tree itself, and then let's go down, or excuse me, the warrior tree, and then let's go down the arms tree, and let's try out that bleed build, because they give it quite a bit of buffs, which is pretty exciting. But let's say you didn't want to go into the bleed build, you could do something like this instead. You could actually take one of these capstones, whatever one you prefer. This is probably better for the DPS specs, as it increases your critical strike damage, where this would probably be better for Prot, as the initial damage increased and the rage generation is increased. Both allows you to get more threat and have more rage as Prot. So Spear is definitely still very good. So if you didn't want to go the bleed build, you could go into the Spear of Bastion instead. But let's actually try out the bleed build. So we definitely obviously got to take the non-negotiables up here. And so since we're going the bleed build, Fueled by Violence is actually pretty interesting because of the extra damage that we're getting from our bleeds. Your deep wounds will actually be dealing 20% more damage, allowing this 50% to be more healing, because obviously it's an increase to your bleed damage, which is very nice to see. And I think we definitely want to take Blood Surge, just because, again, we're going to be going the bleed build. Definitely want to take our overpower damage and our improved mortal strike damage. And then let's get into the bleeds. So I think we want to take, obviously, our Rend, and obviously our Dreadnought, still very powerful. Deep Wounds, Thunderous Roar, and bleed effects is increased by 15%. That's pretty huge. And then let's take Skull Splitter, and our Deep Wounds and Rend expired 10,000% faster. Maybe that's an error, but it's pretty cool. And then Fracture is actually really interesting too. And this essentially makes them expire immediately, but I don't know if you necessarily want them to expire immediately. We'll save this one for a little bit later. We obviously want to take our Colossal Smash, kind of a no-brainer. And then even though Test of Might right now on the beta isn't doing a ton of damage, they tuned it down a little bit. I still think that this is going to be a talent that's worth taking. So we're definitely going to take that bad boy still. We definitely want to take our Anger Management, and then we got 2 points to play around with. So we could definitely take, I think we want to take the Punishment, as that is the Venthyr ability right now, which is very, very good. And I actually think we want to take the Improved Execute, just because as arms, we definitely are more of an executing spec than Fury is, which is very, very nice, leaving us with our 10 points left. So since we're going down the bleed side, we definitely want to take our Mastery, as Mastery is going to increase our bleed damage and our Rend damage, which is very, very nice. Then we have the choice between Battlelord and Bloodletting. I would say Bloodletting is probably better here, just because the Deep Wounds and Thunderous Roar's bleeds effects last 6 seconds longer and have a 5% increased critical strike chance, which is very, very nice. And if our bleeds are critting, then we're getting healed more by Fueled by Violence, which is very nice. And then we'll obviously take a Fatality down here, leaving us with 6 points. So why don't we spec down into the Execute side of the tree? So for example, this is going to be just a single target raid build. This isn't going to be an AoE build. We could change this up a little bit for AoE if we needed to. I would do something like this with our last couple points, leaving us 1 point. So why don't we take good old Sweeping Strikes if we needed the last point, or you could even put 1 point in here, increasing the versatility and reducing the cooldown of Die by the Sword, which is very good. In an AoE situation, you could definitely take Warbreaker and or change this up a bit and go down into the Bladestorm for AoE situations. But for the bleed build, I would definitely go something like this. We definitely still want to be doing our Arms Warrior thing, executing, because that is just a very strong part of Arms Warrior's kits. They're very, very good in execute phases, but I actually think the bleed damage could actually be fairly interesting. It's been a long time since Arms has had a good bleed build, and it's not really been a thing for the last several expansions, so it's pretty exciting to see that back, actually. But if we didn't want to go down the bleed build, why don't we go like a more regular, say, AoE cleave fight? Why don't we take Elysian Might instead of the bleeds, instead of going down into the bleeds? Why don't we take these out of here? We'll still take Rend, because we're taking Blood and Thunder and spending Rend to a lot of the different mobs out there would still be very good. But if we're taking a more AoE situation, why don't we take some Warbreaker and go down into the Execute still? But I think we'd rather go down into the Bladestorm for more AoE situations, leaving us 3 points. And why don't we just take all the different capstones, or at least see what they have? So I actually think think Gathering Storm is pretty darn cool. It's actually very, very powerful in PvP. It's one of those auto take talents for PvP. Just being able to have more strength, more movement speed is very, very good. And Blunt Instruments, I think, is probably the preferred one for the AoE situations. Colossal Smash increased by 30% and its duration is damage increased by 30% and duration is 3 seconds longer. Very, very good. And it also deals 20% more damage. And then why don't we take our Merciless Bone Grinder for extra AoE damage? So I would probably go something like this. You could definitely spec into these down here if you felt that you needed either one of those, or you could also take some points out, let's say out of Sweeping Strikes and put it into Cleave if you felt that was a better option. But for the most part, I think both builds would actually be pretty viable. It would just depend on the tuning that we get for each one of the builds to see what actually ends up becoming better. But again, for single target, we did more of the bleed build, which is actually pretty exciting. And then for the AoE, we built more into the middle with the Blade Storm and the other buffs to Blade Storm. And then I think either way, you still want to take the Execute and Juggernaut. Executing and Juggernaut is so very, very, very powerful. I think it's one of the best things that ARM has had in any expansion, so seeing it back is definitely worth taking. And so you can really mix and match with these last couple points, allowing us to do something like that for the bleed build. But now that we got the arms out of the way, why don't we check up on Fury and see how they're doing? All right, let's go down the Fury notes. Not too many for Fury, but let's see what they have to say. Generally happy with the Fury, as we do not expect to make large scale changes in the future. With arms, changes are likely smaller and or tuning based. As stated previously, we're looking at Annihilator. It can work for multiple weapon types, as we can open up the playstyle for everyone. So Annihilator was, I believe, the auto attack. Annihilator, yes, the auto attacks deal more damage. They want to make it applicable for both single-minded Fury and Titan's Grip. And then it says they're working internally on Odin's Fury, subsequent nodes, and expect to have them functioning shortly. So it'll be really interesting to see what they put down in here with Odin's Fury. But I actually think that there's, with the Thunderous Roar now, I actually think there's a decent build that we'll get into. And then we have some notes. We have maximum frenzy stacks increased to 4. It was 3. So our frenzy is our haste increase. Where's that bad boy? Frenzy, there it is. Rampage increases the haste. And so it was 3 times. Now it goes back up to 4 times. So we get an 8% haste increase, which is very, very nice. Then the cadence of Fujita is been redesigned and now increases auto attack speed. I don't know if that's going to be worth taking unless you're going the single-minded Fury route. Obviously, auto attacks are a very good source of damage, but I don't necessarily know that it is better than the other choice node, and we'll get into that build in a minute. As with Fury Warrior, we do, if you do not have improved with Whirlwind, a Whirlwind should now correctly cost 30 rage. Okay. New talent, Gathering Storm. While Ravager is active, you gain 5% move speed and 5% strength, stacking 6 seconds. So with Fury, obviously, they don't have it with Blade Storm. They took the Blade Storm Gathering Storm idea and applied it to Ravager, which is kind of cool to see. So Ravager might be a very good ability in AoE situations just because it gives you that stacking strength buff and your whirlwinding, rampaging, bloodthirsting, etc. And all those abilities doing more damage as well as having more movement speed is not too shabby at all. And then Deft Experience decreases the cooldown of Bloodthirst by 0.5 seconds per rank, was 5 seconds, so you get another extra quarter of a second cooldown per rank, which is very nice. And then now that we've gone over the notes for Fury, why don't we build the tree as Senior Fury? So unfortunately, I still think that Berserker Stance isn't very good. Unfortunately, they still have to spec into Battle Stance because Berserker Stance still hasn't been changed. Granted, these are work in progress and to be determined, so hopefully they make this a little better. This could be applicable in PvP just because, and it reduces the effectiveness of fears, saps, incapacitates, etc. by 15%. So this could be useful in PvP to swap to, but I think Battle Stance is just going to be the better one overall. I don't think as Fury, I don't think you need Defensive Stance. Again, you're more tanky as Fury than Arms. You have a lot more survivability. So we definitely want to take our Rallying Cry, very, very useful. Alrighty, then we're going to take some Siphoning Strikes. We're going to take some more Rage Generation on our autos, and we're going to increase our auto attack speed. I think taking Spell Reflection is just very, very good. Another defensive, and we want to definitely take our Heroic Leap, leaving us with 1 point to mess around with. And I think we're going to go in, why don't we go into Impending Victory? But you could also take either one of these. Probably Inspiring Presence is a little better most times, but Second Wind if you felt you needed an extra defensive in a raid scenario or M+, but both are still very good. We still want to take our Honed Reflexes, reducing the cooldown of Raging Blow by 1 second and a cooldown of pummel, so more interrupts. And then we have our crushing force. And so why don't we spec down this side first? Let's take the increased rage. I think that's very, very good. And why don't we take the barbaric training for some extra slam and whirlwind damage, and then we'll get down into seismic reverberations and some massacre suite, and then let's spec into crushing force. Even though crushing force is kind of underwhelming for fury, slam is kind of a filler. Obviously we still want to get down into frothing berserker, as that's very powerful. Increasing rage generation because we're getting rage refunded is very, very nice. 1 every 5 times, very, very nice. And then we'll take this, and then we got to figure out how to get down into here. So why don't we take some bounding stride, and then we'll take some double time. Double time is very, very good. And then let's go into, obviously we want to take our avatar, and then we have our memory of the tormented berserker and memory of the tormented titan. So because we're gonna do a bleed build, not necessarily a full bleed build, but we'll be having a lot of builds, why don't we try Odin's Fury? But this one will probably be better. If I had to guess, Recklessness is an incredible cooldown for us, but I do think Odin's Fury is actually quite good. So why don't we take Odin's Fury, and especially because I want to try taking the Thunderous Roar build and allowing us to have our bleeds do more damage, and you'll see why I like that in a minute, leaving us 1 point. So I think with that 1 point left, why don't we take the 10% extra stamina? Again, that is very powerful. And if we didn't need our impending victory, you could also just take bitter immunity in its place. I think both work just fine. So this is how I would spec Fury at the moment, given what we have. And then, but again, you could take either one of these. I think will be very good. My inclination is that Recklessness will still probably be better, because Recklessness, again, like I said, is an incredible cooldown, but I do enjoy having Avatar cast Odin's Fury and Odin's Fury casting Avatar. I think both is very powerful, very, very cool. So this is what I would do for a Fury build. So why don't we go down the Fury tree, and you'll see kind of what I'm talking about with the bleeds. So why don't we take Bloodthirst? Obviously we got to take our non-negotiables, and then we'll take our Enrage Regeneration, very, very powerful, some War Paint action, improved Bloodthirst damage, and improved Raging Blow, allowing us to get down to the bottom, or the middle, I should say. Alrighty, we definitely want to take our Rampage, and we still want to take all 3 of these bad boys. Those are all crazy, crazy powerful. And then we would definitely want to take our Recklessness, but I think we spec Focus and Chaos, and then we definitely still want to spec into Cold Steel Hot Blood. Cold Steel Hot Blood is so very, very good. Even though it is not necessarily as powerful it was in BFA, I still think this ability is incredible, especially because this bleed effect is then buffed by our Thunderous Roar. I think this will actually contribute to a significant amount of damage. And then we got our Blood Craze, increase the critical strike chance of your Bloodthirst. If they're not critting, then you get up to a 50% extra chance to crit for Bloodthirst, allowing us to apply more Cold Steel Hot Bloods. Very, very good. And then we will do the Bloodborne. The bleed damage from Odin's Fury, Thunder Swords, and Gushing Wounds is increased by 15%. Gushing Wounds is this bad boy here. So I definitely love this little trio right here, and I really do think that Cold Steel Hot Blood is very, very strong, leaving us 3 points to get down to the bottom of the tree. So why don't we take the improved Whirlwind, Siege Breaker, and then we have a few options here. We can spec down into the extra charge, the 5% increased damage, or the extra duration on Deafening Crash, the extra duration on Siege Breaker. And you have a 5% increased critical strike chance against enemies affected by Siege Breaker, which is not too bad at all. So why don't we just spec into this for now? But I think any one of these are a decent talent. The numbers will kind of be the deciding factor at the end of the day. So why don't we go down into Odin's Fury, and whatever this is for now, we won't spec into because we don't know, but we are taking this bad boy over here. We're taking the Thunderous Roar so we can get some more Odin's Fury damage. I think this actually will be fairly good because it's a 45-second cooldown, and it allows us to have an additional bleed effect. Very, very strong. And then whatever this will be, we don't quite know yet, but I'm very curious to see what they'll put here. And then we have 7 points left to mess around with. So we have a few different options. So I actually really like the Gathering Storm with the Ravager, both in single target and AoE situations, just because in single target situations, the extra strength is obviously going to provide you a net DPS increase. And the nice thing about Ravager, it's kind of a fire and forget. You throw it down, it does its thing, and you get a stacking strength buff, which is pretty huge. So we'll definitely take some Ravager action. Then we'll take the Gathering Storm with it. I think that's actually really very powerful for both, like I said, for both single target and for multi-target. And then we could spec down into Quick Thinking and then get our Anger Management, allowing our Recklessness to come off cooldown faster. But if you didn't want to go the Ravager route down here and get the Gathering Storm, you could take out the points in here and then spec into Unbridled Ferocity and Depths of Insanity. Both are crazy, crazy powerful talents. And then just like normal, you have the Skull Banner, which is situational, but it still could be very good depending on the tuning. We'll have to see what they do, but it really just depends on the last couple points. And again, if you didn't want to go down this side of the tree, I really do think that this combination right here between Cold Steel Hot Blood, Odin's Fury, Thunderous Roar, I actually think that's going to net quite a bit of damage. Don't underestimate how good Cold Steel Hot Blood is. I don't see in some of the community sentiments, I haven't seen people taking this because I don't know if a lot of people played during BFA, but during BFA, this was a gigantic amount of damage. Not only that, but it's extra rage. Rage is good, obviously. More rage, more abilities, more damage, higher on the meters, etc. So I really think this is not only just good for DPS, but it is also a leech, allowing us to be even more survivable, which is really nice. So with these last 2 points, you could do something like this, getting the extra critical strike chance here, and then specking down into if you really wanted, you could spec down into Onslaught with that last point, as you can trigger it from here. There's a couple different things that you could do. The last point is kind of that to play around with. So why don't we go Odin's Fury modifier, whatever that might be. So I think in a more, if you're really focused on pure single target, this would probably be a little bit better. But if you wanted to go more of a AoE cleave kind of thing that is decent at single target, I think you could do something like this and take out this and then get Anger Management, just because Anger Management is very good for all 3 specs of Warrior. But if you really didn't want to spec into these, I definitely would suggest it, but you don't have to. So why don't we do something like this instead? So why don't we take that out of the Gushing Wounds build here with the bleeds going down to Odin's Fury and switch this to Avatar of the Tormented Berserker, and then we'll spec into the Spear of Bastion instead. And then why don't we go down this and grab, we need 4 more points to get down to the bottom. I think we still want to take that, which is pretty decent. And then we have a few options over here. So why don't we take the Raging Blow talents? We could take Cruelty. Cruelty is not necessarily something that we've always taken or have taken it in the past. We could get Sudden Death. I don't think Sudden Death is bad, or you could always get Fresh Meat. Fresh Meat is also very good. And so we have a few options. So why don't we take the extra Raging Blow damage and the extra charge of Raging Blow, and let's grab 1 more point in Blood Craze. So we can get down to this bottom of the tree. But you could also take, if you didn't want to take Blood Craze, you could take Fresh Meat. You could take the Sudden Death. Both seem very good. And I think for more of a single target scenario, we'll go something like this, which is, like I mentioned, still very, very good, leaving us 1 point. You could put into Onslaught down here, both very good. I think, like I said, I think Ravager will be good both in single target and AoE situations, just because it allows you to have more strength, and more strength obviously is more damage. So if you didn't want to go down the Odin's Fury route and the Thunderous Roar builds with the bleeds, you could go something more like this, which I think is pretty darn cool. I know there are some people who love Onslaught, and so this allows you to be able to take that, but there are definitely a lot of really nice things in the Fury tree still. I really like what they've done with this side of the tree. This side of the tree used to be kind of rough, but I love being able to get Siegebreaker back. Siegebreaker is one of my favorite abilities in Fury. But like I said, I personally love the Cold Steel Hot Blood build. That's what I will be testing out and trying. So stay tuned for those. But with Fury out of the way, why don't we hop into Prot and wrap this video up? All right, let's read the last little bit of notes and then go down the Prot tree, and I'll explain why I think this new Shockwave talent is very, very good. All right, protection developer notes. As we went down the attention of focus the focus on Fury and Arms, we're putting more focus on protection internally. Protection will undergo a tuning pass similar to Arms and Fury soon, which is really cool to see. Having played Prot on the beta, it feels very strong. Feels very, very strong. So they fixed another issue with seismic reverberations, hopefully the last one, they say, which is kind of funny. And then a Blood Surge now increased to 20%, was 10%. So I think this is worth taking again. 10% was so very rough. So going from in a 100% chance, right, you'd get 1 out of every 10 ticks would trigger a extra rage. Now you're getting 20%, so that is 1 in every 5, which is way better than 1 in every 10. Literally double the amount, which is very, very good. Alrighty, so we definitely still want to take our Rallying Cry, very important. Definitely want to take our Spell Reflect, our Heroic Leap, our Thunderclap. and then we'll take some Berserk Fury so we can get some extra rage from our auto attacks. As you'll know from auto attacking with Prot, that is one of your primary sources of damage, so more rage from auto attacking is great. More auto attack speed on your auto attacks is great, leaving us with 1 point. So why don't we take, say, Impending Victory and some Honed Reflexes. I think Impending Victory is very, very good. Allowing all specs to get it is very nice with really no penalty. I really like Impending Victory. And then, but if you didn't want to take Impending Victory, you could take your Inspiring Presence. And then why don't we take the Honed Reflexes? Obviously very, very powerful. Why don't we take the extra Shield Slam damage and Critical Strike ability? Take our Frothing Berserker and our Armored to the Teeth. We definitely want to take our Blood and Thunder. And then we'll take Double Time just like normal, leaving us 5 points to play around with before we get down to the bottom. So why don't we do the Increased Rage? We got some Seismic Reverberations and some Sudden Death, and so we need un punto for the bottom of the tree. So why don't we take the Barbaric Training for now, allowing our Revenge to do more damage, but it costs 10 more rage. That's okay. The nice thing about this Revenge one, though, Revenge deals 40% more damage, but now costs 10 rage. If we're getting the free Revenge procs, the 40% damage is obviously a net bonus, but I don't think obviously getting a free Revenge proc, the rage would not proc, but your Revenge just deals 40% more damage for Revenge procs. That's at least how I believe it will work. I would be kind of bummed out if this Revenge extra damage was only from non-Revenge procs, if that makes sense for everybody. All right, now we got our 11 points left. So I think kind of a no-brainer. We'll take down our one-handed weapon specialization. We'll definitely take our Avatar and our Unstoppable Force into our Thunderclapping God selves. Now we got 6 points left. So let's get into why I think this talent is bananas. So even though it says you send a shockwave forth doing only 20% of your attack power, stunning all enemies for 10 yards with 2 seconds, this increases the damage by 350% and always will deal critical strikes, and then rumbling earth to reduce the cooldown as well. Obviously this is not as applicable in a single target scenario, but in a Mythic Plus, I think this will become the staple, and let me explain why. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll put up a little graphic on the screen for everybody that allows you to see. I took a screenshot of both Shockwave and the amount of damage it does on beta from a fresh 60 character, and then I took a screenshot of Spear of Bastion and the amount of damage it deals on a fresh character in beta right now. So essentially what you're really debating between in a Mythic Plus scenario is you're going to spec down into the Shockwave. You could go down the Thunderous Roar because it'll allow your Rend to do more damage, but I don't necessarily know that is going to be worth it for Prot, but it definitely could be. But I really do think between these two, I really think that's your AoE selection here is either into the Shockwave and or into Spear of Bastion as the real two close competitors. But let's go into why I think this talent is pretty nutty. So as you'll see, the graphic on the screen will show you that the Shockwave is going to deal 295 damage on a 40-second cooldown, but we are taking the Rumbling Earth, reducing that down to 25 seconds. So if we take that 295 damage, let's open up a calculator on the old Google. So we take 295 damage, and then we times that by 3.5, as we are going to be getting 350% increased damage. So 350% increased damage, we're timesing 295 by 3.5, getting us to a 1032.5 damage. But you'll remember this also says it always crits, and so crits are 200% damage. So what we really need to do is we need to times this by 5.5, because we're getting the 200% damage from a crit, which is guaranteed, and then we're getting the 350% damage increase. So timing 295 by 5.5 nets us 1622 damage, rounded up to 623 damage per target hit on a 25-second cooldown, which is pretty crazy. So you're like, well, 1600 damage doesn't seem like a lot. So let's go over the Spear of Bastion damage instead. So with the Spear of Bastion, the initial damage, the 165%. So let's spec into it like this. And I think as as Prot, you would take the Piercing Verdict. So that is an extra 30% damage from the initial damage. So that would be 195% of your physical damage. So for Spear of Bastion, you'll see on the graphic that it is dealing 2,435 physical damage. So if we take 30% of 2,335 735 damage. That nets us another 730 damage. So if we take 2,435 plus the 730, that nets us 3,165 damage. And then we will add on the additional damage over 5 seconds. So we take that and we'll add another 2,568 damage, netting us a total of 5,733 damage per target. But as you'll see, it deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets, where Shockwave does not. And so the important thing to look at here is like, well, obviously 5,733 is a bigger number than 1,622, but Spear of Bastion is on a 90-second cooldown, 1.5 minute cooldown, where the Shockwave is on a 25-second cooldown, hitting 3 targets. And granted, I don't know that you're actually clicking Shockwave if you're not hitting 3 targets with it, as you don't want to waste your extra cooldown. But think of it this way, you can essentially get 3.5 procs with Shockwave per 1 Spear of Bastion. It's not quite 4, but it's 3. So if we take the 1622 times 3.5, oops, not plus, times 3.5, that's actually netting 5,677 damage in the cooldown of, or in the time frame that you would do 5,733 damage from your Spear of Bastion. So if you take the same amount of time, there's really only 100 damage difference between the two if you're using it in the same amount of time, as we're getting 3.5 procs per cooldown, essentially in the duration of 90 seconds, because it's a 25-second cooldown, 25, 50, 75, obviously, and then a half, as you can't have the cooldown back up immediately, just because obviously we have an extra 10 seconds to go, or excuse me, 15 seconds to go. And so it's 3.5. So the difference really is only about 100 damage, which is really, really crazy. So because we're able to do almost the same amount of damage in the same time frame, they're actually really competitive. But I think what actually takes the Shockwave ability over Spear of Bastion is that Spear of Bastion has reduced damage to 5 targets and Shockwave has no cap. So if you're, for example, pulling really big with your Shockwave and the additional range increase allowing you to hit more targets, there is no target cap. So you're hitting up to, say you're hitting the same 5 targets, it's going to be very similar damage. But if you're pulling really big and you have more than 5 targets, Shockwave starts to be a lot better because it is not target capped like Spear of Bastion is. Spear of Bastion will reduce damage obviously over 5 targets, and also it's not always guaranteed that all the mobs inside of your spear will last the entire 5-second duration that the residual damage ticks over, excuse me, 4-second duration. So it's not always guaranteed, because if you're blowing up these packs, that they live for that 4-second duration, whereas Shockwave, it's a very fast, immediate cast, allowing you to get off all the damage immediately. So I actually really do think that for Prot more specifically, that this is actually a very, very powerful ability, and I think people are sleeping on it. Granted, part of the power of this ability comes from being able to reduce the cooldown by 15 seconds when you're hitting 3 targets. Again, this is more for a multi-target scenario. I think in a single target scenario, Spear of Bastion will probably net you more damage, obviously, but in a multi-target scenario in M+, which I think Prot is already going to be very, very good at, this will take Prot damage over the top. It's going to be incredible. So like I said, there's really only a 100 or so damage difference between the two, even less than 100 damage, about 70 damage difference between the two, given the same amount of time and the same amount of cooldowns, which really shows that these are quite comparable. But again, the 5 target reduction on Spear of Bastion, I think, is what kind of sways it in the way of the big old Shockwave damage. I really do think people are sleeping on it, and as you see with the math broken down for you, it's really, really close. So now that we've gone over all that math, I hope I didn't melt anybody's brain with all that. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. So with quick thinking, we get the 1.5% haste, which is very good, and the 2.5% additional auto attack speed, so we get 7.5 auto attack speed increase, which is nice. Or we could take our bitter immunity if we felt so inclined, or if we needed a intimidating shout, or if we needed a extra stun, or we wanted some extra survivability, or we needed a shattering throw. There's a lot of different things that we could do. Take the extra cooldown on heroic leap. Lots of different ways to go, but just for the ease of use, why don't we take our bitter immunity? Another defensive cooldown is always very, very powerful on a tank, especially because the tanks will a lot of the time have a curse or a bleed effect from a boss encounter. So I think bitter immunity is very, very powerful, hence why dwarves are usually taken as the primarily tank in the great push. As you'll see, 99% of the time you'll see the tanks are all dwarves just because of their racial. Getting a 10% DR and being able to remove all these is very, very powerful. So being able to do that twice just increases the efficacy of dwarves in M+, and I think they'll continue to stay probably the best tank for M+, or excuse me, the best race for M+. All right, now that we went down this and did all the math over here, why don't we go down Prot? I really don't think too much has changed. We obviously have our non-negotiables up here. I think both of these are very good, and either one is very, very good for you to take, but I think we take the booming voice still, leaving us with 1 point. So why don't we take Brace for Impact? But you could take either one of these. They're both very powerful. And then I think we actually want to take our Blood Surge again because the proc rate went up to 20%, actually allowing for, I think, a more significant source of bleed damage and rage generation, which is very, very nice. And then we definitely want to take our Shield Wall, our Thunder Lord, our Into the Fray, our Enduring Defenses, our Anger Management, and the Wall. And I think Brutal Vitality will net us more damage. If you did go down the Thunderous Roar, you might be more inclined to take Fueled by Violence, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Especially if you're going to do that, you could always take the Bloodborne, the Thunderous Roar damage, and Deep Wounds and Rend, do additional damage if you wanted to go, again, more of the more specific bleed build. But for now, we'll go the Bolster and Punish, and then we'll take the old Reliables. And I think you definitely want to take, in an AoE situation, you could take Ravager, and in a more single target scenario, hopefully they make this better and they reduce the minimum range on it, because as it stands now, this probably just isn't competitive enough compared to the other ones. So why don't we take the 3 points here? And I don't necessarily know that you always need the extra duration. So why don't we take our last point in the increased stamina and armor by 5% and the haste by 2%, allowing us to have a little bit more haste and stamina and armor, which are both very, very good. So as you can see, not a ton change with Prot. Again, if you wanted to go down more of a Thunderous Roar build, you could do something like this instead and take Punish with these bad boys and take the Ravager and do a little bit more bleed damage over here. If this is going to actually be, if you're taking the Thunderous Roar over here, we'll have to see the tuning. I'm very interested to see how much this will do with the increased damage and whether this will be better than the Shockwave talent in M+, but I really do think that the Shockwave talent is actually straight bananas good. So with that being said, I think that's everything for the Warrior video, so I'll meet you guys on the other side and we'll wrap this video up. Alrighty folks, that's gonna do it for this episode of the Warrior updates. Thank you all so much for watching and tuning in. Remember to make sure to subscribe for all future Warrior updates and future tank updates that we will be doing on this channel. I really do appreciate everybody's support. So if this content was helpful for you, make sure to throw a subscription down, throw down a like and a comment for the algorithm would be wonderful. Thank you all so much. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, remember to be safe and be kind, and I will catch you all in the next one.